The mirror in the boarding house hallway was the first one Mabel Crane had stood in front of for 9 days, and she did not stand in front of it long. She had taken off her bonnet to pin her hair before she went down to meet the man, and she caught her own face in the spotted glass, sunburnt across the nose from the open wagon, broad through the jaw, plain as a plate. A face she had made her peace with somewhere around her 20th year, and she said it out loud to herself the way you say a thing you have already decided not to mind. I ain't pretty, and I know it. Then she put the bonnet back on, picked up the carpet bag and the wooden box she would not let the porter carry, and went down to meet the man who had paid her coach fare to come and run his kitchen in a town she had never heard of until the telegram came. If you have ever looked in a mirror and said something unkind about your own face, and meant it, and believed it was only the truth, then I think you'll want to stay with me to the end of this one. Subscribe to the channel and tap the bell so the next story finds its way to you. And drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now come with me to the high, dry country of the Texas Hill Panhandle. In the late summer of 1887, where a woman named Mabel Crane has just decided, one more time, exactly what she is worth, and a man named Silas Doane is about to disagree with her, in 3 words, in front of a town that agreed with her completely. She had not come west to be looked at. That was the whole appeal of the thing, if she was honest, which she generally was. Mabel Crane had spent 33 years in a mill town in Indiana being the dependable one, the sister who stayed, the daughter who nursed, the woman the others handed the hard jobs to because she had no husband waiting and no children pulling, and a back like a draft horse and hands that did not shake. When her father died, she had nursed him to the end, and when he was buried, she found that the small house went to a cousin she had met twice, that being the way the law saw a daughter who had given a man 11 years of her life, and that she was 33 and unwanted and free in the cold way that being unwanted makes a person free. The telegram had come through the church. A widower in Texas, 3 children, a failing way station, and an inn that fed the stage line, and no woman to run the kitchen since his wife passed in the spring. $25 the month. Room, board, he had asked, in the wire, only whether she could cook for 40 travelers a day and keep books. He had not asked one word about her face. That had been the thing that made her answer. The driver who carried her the last leg out to Doane's Crossing was around. Talkative man named Hobbs, who seemed personally pleased to have a passenger to inform. "You'll be for the crossing," he said. "Cookin' for Silas Doane. I'll tell you for nothing. The last gal he brought out lasted 9 days and went back east on the same coach line, crying. Silas don't say 2 words together. Lost his wife to the milk sickness back in March, and a piece of him went into the ground with her, you ask me. 3 young ones. Boy of 10, girl of 7, and the baby, near 3. That one was just walking good when her mama passed." He clucked at the team. "Folks at the crossing'll size you up before you're down off this seat, ma'am. I'll tell you that too. It's that kind of place. Everybody eatin' in one room. Everybody knowin' everybody's business." Mabel said she expected she could manage being sized up. She had a great deal of practice. She had felt their eyes already, back at the depot in town, the way she had felt eyes her whole life, that slow travel from the bonnet down, the small recalculation in a stranger's face. The verdict reached and filed. She had stopped flinching from it before she was 20. She had learned a long time ago that the verdict said more about the one who reached it than about the one it landed on, and that the only power she had over it was to refuse to be slowed by it. So when the 2 women on the boardwalk had stopped their talk to watch her pass, and one of them had said, behind a hand that did not lower the voice much, "That's the new cook?" Well, he ain't paying for the view. Mabel Crane had not stopped walking. She had not even turned her head. She had 31 miles still to go, and a wooden box of sourdough started to keep alive against her chest, and she did not have time, then or ever, for a stranger's appraisal of her face. Doan's Crossing, when it rose up out of the dry gold country, was worse than Hobbs had let on. The way station was sound enough, but the inn beside it had the look of a place where a man had stopped caring about anything that did not bleed or starve. The porch sagged. A shutter hung by one hinge and banged in the hot wind. The kitchen garden was gone over entirely to weed and seed, 2 seasons of neglect standing brown and tall, where someone had once kept rows. It was not the neglect of a lazy man. It was the neglect of a man who had stopped seeing the things his wife used to see, because seeing them only reminded him she was no longer there to see them. Silas Doan was splitting wood in the side yard when the coach pulled in, and he set the axe down and came around, and he looked at her the way Hobbs had warned her he might, but he did not laugh, and his face did not change, and after a moment he said, "You'll be Mrs. Crane, Miss Mabel Crane. Your wire said 25 the month, room and board, cooking for the line and keeping the books." Her voice was flat and easy. She was stating terms, not pleading them. "I can do all 3. Where do you keep the children while you work?" Something crossed his face when she said the children and was gone before it finished, walled off. The way a man walls off a window in a room he no longer uses. "Boy minds the little ones. Kitchen's through there." He picked the axe back up. "Supper's at 6 for the line, whether it's ready or not." And he turned back to the wood before she could ask the question rising in her, which was about the little girl of 7 she could see watching from the doorway with a face far too still for 7, though she had a feeling the question would not have been welcome yet. The kitchen was a disaster, and not the ordinary kind. The big iron range was crusted with the burned-on wreck of months of bad cooking by hands that did not want to be there. The flour barrel stood open and had been found by weevils. There was a sourness in the air from a churn left to spoil, and a film of grease over everything that catches grease, and in the middle of it stood the boy of 10 with a wooden spoon in his hand, and a look on his face that dared her to say one word about the state of a kitchen he had been trying and failing to run since March. His name, she would learn, was Caleb, and he was 10 years old and had been the man of a kitchen since spring, and it had aged him. Mabel surveyed it without a flicker of her face. Then she set down her bag, set the box of starter on the one shelf the grease had not reached, took off her bonnet and hung it on a nail, and rolled her sleeves past her strong forearms. "We'll want the big kettle on to boil," she said to the boy, as though they had been at this together for years. "And then we'll boil it again, and you'll show me where the line eats, and how many, and what they've been paying, because I'm told I'm to keep the books and a person can't keep what she can't count." Caleb Doan stared at her a moment. Then, not certain why, he went to put the kettle on. By dark the range was scoured to its iron and blacked and roaring, and the line of stage travelers got fed at 6, beans done right, and cornbread, and a pan gravy that made one teamster ask, suspicious, who died and left them a real cook. By the 3rd day, she had the garden's worst rows pulled, and a fall planting in, and the book squared back 4 months to where Silas had stopped being able to look at his wife's last clean column. None of this was strictly the work she had been hired for. She did not wait to be thanked, which was as well, because no one thanked her. A woman who has spent her life being useful and unremarked learns to take her wage in the doing of the thing. The food was what began to undo them, the way it always does in a house where grief has gone too long without a kindness it could not refuse. Mabel knew. She had learned it across a lifetime of being the largest, plainest woman at every table, that there is a hunger in people that has nothing to do with the belly, and that bread is one of the few honest answers a person can give to it. The first morning her loaves came out of that range, the smell went through the whole inn before she could call anyone. That warm, living smell of yeast and crust that gets down into the boards of a place and tells everyone in it, without a single word, that somebody has decided to stay. She cut the heel of the first loaf, still steaming, the crust ticking as it cooled, and buttered it gold and set it down in front of the littlest one, the baby, near 3, who was always underfoot and never crying, just watching with those grave round eyes. The child took it in both hands and ate it like she had been waiting her whole short life for it, and when it was gone she held the empty hands up, and Mabel cut another and buttered it and gave it over, and said nothing. But the 7-year-old, her name was Pearl, and she had not, Caleb told Mabel later, said more than yes ma'am and no ma'am to a soul since her mother died. Pearl came and stood close and watched the bread. And Mabel cut a piece for her too, without comment, without looking, the way you feed a thing that has learned not to expect to be fed. And Silas Doane, come to the door for his coffee, stood and watched his children eat warm bread from the hands of the plain woman he had paid to come, and something in his shut-down face moved a hairline before he caught it, and he carried his coffee out into the yard rather than let anyone see what was working in it. He began to do things he did not name. A morning came when the banging shutter had been quietly set right on its hinge. The garden gate, which had dragged, swung true. A stack of stove wood appeared by the kitchen door each evening, cut short to the length she liked, though she had never said the length out loud, and he had never said he'd noticed. He took to lingering at the supper table after the line had cleared out, a few minutes past the eating, just sitting in the lamplight with the 3 children near him, until he caught himself doing it, and got up and went to see to the stock. Mabel said nothing of any of it. Neither did he. The children saw, the way children always see, and Caleb's hard chin had begun, by the second week, to come unset when he looked at her. It was Pearl who reached him, and she did it without quite meaning to. Mabel had taken to letting the girl punch down the dough, which a 7-year-old finds to be a great and serious privilege, and one afternoon Pearl, flour to the elbows and lost in the work, leaned against Mabel's side and stayed there, warm and trusting, and said, out loud, in a small, clear voice that had not strung that many words together in months, "My mama used to let me do the punchin' down." Mabel did not stop her hands. She did not make a thing of it. She said, "Then you already know how, and you can teach me her way, because I expect hers was better than mine." And Silas, in the doorway with his hat in his hand, heard his daughter speak of her mother without breaking, for the first time since the burying, and he stood very still and did not come in, and Mabel, with her back to him, felt him there and let him be. The crack came on a still hot afternoon in the person of a man named Royce Talent, who held the contract to supply the stage line and meant to hold the crossing too. He had been waiting, patient as drought, for Silas's grief to finish the slow work of ruining him, so that the way station and its water, and water in that country was everything, would come cheap into his hand. He rode in without being asked to, and walked into Mabel's clean kitchen and looked it over with the eyes of a man pricing another man's goods, and his eyes went over Mabel last. Top to bottom, slow, the way the women on the boardwalk's eyes had gone over her. "Well," he said, and smiled to make it a joke everyone was meant to share. "Silas, I'll say this. You didn't hire her for the looks." And he laughed. Silas Doane did not laugh. But he did not answer either, and Mabel watched the old shut-down flatness drop back over his face like a board nailed over a window. And she understood that grief had taught this man to take a blow and stand there under it rather than throw one back, and that taking this one quietly was going to cost him the only thing his children had left. Talent had papers. There was a supply debt, run up across the months when Silas could not bring himself to open the mail his wife had always opened, and a lien against the water rights that Talent had arranged, in the small, careful print of a patient man, to fall due all at once, and impossible at the end of the season. He laid it on Mabel's scrubbed table like a thing he already owned, and he stayed to the supper he was not offered, and he talked the whole while in the comfortable voice of a man who has never once had to wonder if he was welcome anywhere. That same night the baby took the croup. It came on in the small hours, the terrible barking cough and then the worst silence between, and Silas stood in the bedroom doorway, with all the old terror naked on his face, a man who had buried a wife to sickness in the spring and did not believe the year would let him keep the rest. Mabel did not leave him standing in it. She set him to getting the kettle boiling and a sheet rigged to tent the steam, gave his hands a thing to do, and she took the child up against her broad, warm chest, and walked her, and steamed her, and kept her chin up out of the worst of it. Hour upon hour, low and steady, until somewhere past the dead middle of the night, the cough loosened, and the baby breathed clean and slept. Silas had not gone to bed. He had sat the whole night against the wall watching the plain woman keep his youngest in the world, and when the gray came up in the window he said, "Horse, you could have called me to take a turn." And Mabel, the sleeping child still on her shoulder, said only, "You were taking your turn. You were here, and would not be argued with about it." She had also read Talent's papers, every line. She had kept her father's mill accounts since she was a girl, and she had read, in the fine print Talent counted on no grieving man troubling to read, that the lien he meant to foreclose described water rights that had been deeded, years back and properly recorded at the county seat. Not to the crossings land at all, but to the stage company under its line contract. And that Silas Doane did not personally own the water Talent was preparing to seize, which meant Talent's lien attached to nothing, and the debt against it was air. It was not a thing she could say yet. It was a card, and she meant to lay it down where the whole table would see. She laid it down 3 weeks later, on the morning Talent rode in with the county clerk and 2 hired men to take possession, with half of Doane's crossing finding reasons to stand about and watch the widower go under. The same boardwalk women, the same slow measuring eyes, the teamsters off the morning stage. Talent read his claim aloud for the pleasure of the crowd, and it was then that the plain woman they had all sized up and dismissed came down off the sagging porch with a folded paper of her own and put it in the county clerk's hand. "You'll want to read that against the deed book at the county seat," she said, plain and clear, so the whole yard caught it. "The water on this lien was deeded to the stage company under the line contract in '81. It's recorded. It was never Mr. Doane's to lose, which means it was never Mr. Talent's to take, which means there's nothing under this lien but paper and nerve." She looked at Talent, and she did not smile. "You drew a claim against water you knew the deed book says you can't touch, in front of a county officer. I'd be asking him, was I you, what they call that here?" The clerk read it. The clerk read it twice, and sent a man to fetch the deed book, and the deed book came, and it said exactly what the plain woman had said it said. The color went out of Royce Talent's face in front of every soul who had come out to watch a broken man humbled, and what they watched go under that morning was Talent. Silas Doane had spent words like a man who knew the cost of them his whole life, and never more carefully than in the silent half-year behind him. But there, in his own yard, in front of every man and woman in Doane's Crossing who had ever looked at her sideways or laughed behind a hand, he spent them plain. He came down off the porch and stood beside her, close, where no one could miss it, and Mabel, not used to being stood beside in front of people, said low, almost to herself, the old worn thing, "Silas, I ain't pretty, and I know it. You don't have to. And Silas Doane stopped her. He put up a hand and stopped her, and he said the 3 words to her and to the whole gathered yard at once. Look again. He let it sit. Then, to the rest of them, this woman fed my children when I couldn't. Sat up 3 nights keeping my baby breathing. Saved the water under our feet when not one of you lifted a hand. You want to talk about what she looks like? You talk to me first. And there was not a soul in that yard who had anything to say to him. The county officer took Talent off to answer for a lien drawn against water he had no claim to, and the boardwalk women found the dust at their feet very absorbing, and the wagon the hired men had brought to haul off the crossing's goods went back down the road carrying nothing but the men. The fall came on gentle that year in the hill country, the heat going off the days a little at a time. The shutter hung true. The garden Mabel had put in came up in long green rows where 2 seasons of wheat had stood, and the line travelers took to planning their stops around the crossing on the strength of the cooking, so the books, when she squared them, ran black for the first time since the spring. Caleb laughed in the kitchen now, a sound she had not heard the first month, and was teaching Pearl her letters off the supply slates, and the baby, who could not now be made to stop talking, followed Mabel through every hour of the day narrating it. And Pearl, who had gone so still and quiet in the spring, sang while she punched down the dough. Her mother's kitchen songs, the words half wrong and all the sweeter for it, and her father stood in the doorway one morning and heard it, and had to turn his face to the yard. Mabel Crane married Silas Doane in the first cool week of October, under no church roof, but in the big eating room of the inn with the whole stage line and half the county crowded in to witness it. And she stood up to it the way she had come to stand up to everything. Square, both feet planted, her plain broad face lifted and unhidden, taking up the whole of the life she had crossed a country to find. She had told herself her whole life what she was and was not, and had believed she was only being truthful. She had finally come to rest in a place that looked at her and saw the truth she had never once been told. In 1912, their daughter Pearl, who by then sang in the church and could not be hushed, was married in that same big room, and the woman who stood at the head of it, gray now and broad and entirely without apology, no longer said the old worn thing about her own face, because somewhere along the years she had quit believing it. She had quit the morning a quiet man stopped her in a yard full of people and told her, in 3 words, to look again. She did. She had been worth looking at all along. And she was home.